Hello and welcome to the Weekend Booktopian. I'm Mark Harding, Content and Brand Manager for Booktopia, and this is a podcast about the books we're reading. Joining me today are Head of Trade Books, Jo Lewin. Hello, Jo. And Category Manager for Lifestyle Books, Shanu Prasad. Hi, Shanu.
Hi.
And we are also joined by Category Manager for Nonfiction, Joel Naoum. Hello, Joel.
Hi, Mark.
First up today, some book news, and we'll delve into the books everyone is reading, and be sure to stick around until the end of the show when my guests will go head-to-head in a book quiz battle, which this week, in honor of the day before the day that we're recording, is Halloween themed. So good luck with that. It's very general.
Just give it to Joel now. I'm not going to know anything about that.
You will.
I'm sorry. Could you just say Halloween themed? I thought that my recording had stopped there. Halloween themed book quiz.
Yeah.
Right. I think I've been put onto the wrong podcast.
Yeah, me too.
They're broad.
I think that Mark has just decided again that his interests are the things that book trivia should be about.
Because it's Halloween this weekend, Shanu.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. I think you put me on the wrong. I don't think I should have been on this podcast. I watched a 5-second clip last night on Nightly Pop on E! News from Lovecraft Country with these two creepy twins following this girl around, and
terrifying.
I had nightmares. It was like a 5-second clip. I can't handle even talk about scary things.
Hey, look,
I could run away before. If you don't hear from me, it's because I've run away before the book fight has started.
Maybe there is a question about creepy twins in there. You don't know. I mean, there's not, but like.
and if it's a book quiz and it's about, I don't know I know Lovecraft Country was based on a book, but very loosely, right?
I think you might be surprised at I've tried to make the questions very easy.
Yeah, that's what you said last time, and I don't think I answered one. So they're Mark easy and just general people listening easy seem to be two different levels.
Well, I think there's the weeks when I have the time to kind of research the questions, and then there are the weeks when I just have to pull books off my shelf and I'm like, I'm going to ask about that and that and that, and it's always about like Ian M. Banks or something. But that's not the case this week.
Sure, we'll see. We will see.
All right, so book news topics. The US election is happening next week. We are in the midst of a huge phenomenon of Trump book publishing and interest in US politics. Joel, you're the category manager for this area. What are we seeing at the moment in terms of the way these books are trending, and what is the future after the election? For the books, for the world.
Not for the world. Yeah, I'm not going to predict the outcome of the election. But there was a huge spike in publishing around Trump issues right after he was elected, basically, and for the first maybe 6 months or so of his time in office, that then extended to whenever it took for people to actually, write research and publish the books that were about him. And they completely warped the publishing industry in the United States so that they weren't publishing anywhere near as much other stuff. So it's completely changed, I think, the publishing industry to some extent. The appetite in Australia hasn't been anywhere near the same, but we have had some big standout books. And then it just disappeared. All the sales for those books dropped off a cliff. Everyone just got sort of used to Trump. And it was no longer that remarkable that he said crazy things all the time. In about, I guess, July-ish, I think a couple of books came out that really seemed to jump out again. I guess it was off the back of the Black Lives Matter protests and a just general discontent with the pandemic response and stuff like that. And so there were a couple of big books that came out at that time that were very, very critical of Trump and were from people who had been in his administration or very, very close to him. And then they seem to have disappeared now too, and the books that are around are not necessarily selling in huge numbers in the lead up to the election, in Australia at least. I'm sure that may not be the case in the US. And I think what everyone's waiting for is actually for Obama's book, which is coming out just after the election. And I think that was announced a couple of months ago now. And I think it'd be really interesting to see what happens with that, depending on the outcome, whether that book is like, if Biden wins, it will be like, here we are, a return to sanity, and this, remember what it was like. And if Trump wins, it'll be like everyone losing their minds and in the midst of that, whether Obama's book disappears, or I find it really hard to predict how the election outcome is going to change that. But I think there's no doubt in my mind that if Trump wins another term, there will be another huge spike in Trump publishing. And if Trump doesn't win, I suspect there will be a couple of books that are like wrap-ups of the Trump era.
But we also just don't know, Joel, sorry to cut in, but we don't know what Trump's going to do next.
That's true.
Like, is he going to try and dispute the outcome of the election?
Not if he wins.
No, but that's what I'm saying. If he loses, what's going to happen next? Just because he loses the election doesn't mean that he's going to necessarily fade into the background. All sorts of things could happen with him going forward. So we're living in very exciting times. Who knows?
Isn't that a curse in Mandarin? May you live in interesting times.
Yes, that's right. And I think that curse is upon us.
Yeah, very true.
I'm curious as to whether Trump continues, whether he loses in the next election, or whether he stays on for another 3 terms or whatever he said he's going to do. But when he's finally out of office, whether he's going to continue the tradition of writing the presidential memoir, because that would be a really.
I'm sure he will. I mean, he's written books before.
Has he?
Written. Nobody out in the world can see my air quotes, but they were very firmly around the word written.
I would doubt. I mean, he'll have it ghostwritten, but I doubt he'd be the first president to have his memoir ghostwritten. So even that's not that. I think he'll start a TV channel that is worse than Fox News.
I was about to say, doesn't he already have a TV channel?
If he has it wouldn't surprise me then if he has a spin-off publishing imprint. I'll find someone to do that. So that's what we can look forward to, an entire media empire run by Donald J. Trump. Fun!
I'm sure you're looking forward to meeting with that publishing imprint sales rep.
I'm sure that sales rep is looking forward to repping that list.
All right, moving on to the next topic. Shakespeare Company, the legendary Paris bookstore, has reported that they've seen their sales fall 80% this year, and they are asking for orders and for support to help them through this tough time. It comes off the back of lots of bookstores around the world kind of facing tough times during COVID. What do we think about the impact of this on these famous independent bookstores? I mean, Shakespeare Company is not just a bookstore; it's its own like little cultural thing. So many famous authors have come through there and written within its walls. And should it close down, it would be the end of a publishing phenomenon, I think.
I think these days, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, and you guys might know better than me, but these days I think Shakespeare & Co. is more like a literary tourist attraction, like a literary Disneyland, because, you come here and see the bit of floor that Hemingway slept on and all that kind of thing. It's certainly served its purpose as a haven for struggling artists, but it would be really sad to see an icon like that disappear. They say that they've run through all of their savings and that they're behind on their rent and all of that kind of thing. It would be sad to see them go. But apparently they're already getting quite a lot of support because they have probably quite a lot of rich fans. And some of the people that they call them their tumbleweeds, the people that slept there and worked there and wrote there. A lot of those people are very, very wealthy authors now, or the descendants of very, very wealthy authors. So I think that they've got a pretty rich base of supporters to call on. Lots of independent bookstores don't have that rich history and that rich base of support.
And I see that in France as well, the Bookselling Association has asked to be listed as an essential service, which would entitle them.
That's very French, isn't it?
Yeah,
it is. Yeah, but look, I mean, we've seen in the Australian book industry that far from, everybody being scared to spend money on books. Sales of books have skyrocketed across the whole industry because, when you are stuck at home, you need to have something. You need to have something for your mental health. And there's only so many series you can watch on Netflix before you need to turn to another pastime. So I can see how having books available is really, really important for people in these times, especially as they're facing another lockdown.
Absolutely. I think it'd be really interesting to see how Australia fares through this in terms of our independent bookshop scene. I think there's a good chance that we will see some closures of small indies, which will be a real tragedy for the whole industry. Because, I think unlike the US and the UK, we've already seen a huge contraction of independent bookshops in the wake of, supermarkets in the UK and, big box stores in the US and Walmart and Amazon. We have held on to a pretty healthy chunk of our industry being independent bookshops compared to those countries. And if this is what knocks some of them over, I think that will be really sad, because I do think Australia has quite a interesting and diverse literary culture.
And I think especially because, we're seeing even in the States where lockdown is very much relaxed, that people are holding on to this new habit of reading more. People are really taking the good things that have come out of lockdown, the chance to spend time with family and friends, cooking and entertaining more, reading, gardening, all of that stuff, all of the good stuff and the slowing down stuff, and remembering how important those things are. So hopefully for those that can survive the short-term financial pain, which I know must be really difficult, there's plenty of opportunity coming up.
Yeah. Before we move on to the next part of the show, if we've finished our chat, we are sponsored this week by Vanishing Falls, a novel by Poppy G. Celia Lilly is rich, beautiful, and admired. She's also missing. And the search for the glamorous socialite is about to expose all the dark, dirty secrets of Vanishing Falls. Deep within the lush Tasmanian rainforest is the remote town of Vanishing Falls, a place with a storied past. The town's showpiece, built in the 1800s, is its calendar house, currently occupied by Jack Lilly, a prominent art collector and landowner, his wife Celia, and their 4 daughters. The elaborate, eccentrically designed mansion houses 1 masterpiece and 52 rooms, and Celia Lilly isn't in any of them. She has vanished without a trace. Vanishing Falls by Australian novelist Poppy G is available from the 17th of November at booktopia.com.au. All right, let's get into what we've been reading this week. Let's start with Shanu. What are you reading at the moment?
What I'm reading, nothing, but what I've read, because I only read on the weekends. I don't have time to read during the week. I don't know you crazy people who have time for weekday reading, is David Chang's memoir, Eat a Peach, which he co-wrote with Gabe Uller. And for people that don't know, David Chang is mainly, I guess he would call himself a restaurateur, but also host of TV shows and podcasts, and quite well known in Australia, more so than some other US chefs, because he did spend a year in Sydney while he was opening his restaurant, Momofuku Cebu, in the Star Casino. And this memoir was so much more, like I don't actually know what I was expecting when I started it. I just needed something to read, and I was just like, oh, yep, that's just come out, and I've eaten at the Momofuku restaurants in New York and in Sydney, and I've always, found him really interesting and loved the food, and so I thought, let's give it a go. And it was amazing. It was one of the best pieces, I think one of the best things I've read and enjoyed and found sort of challenging and interesting, like all year. And I've read a lot of stuff this year. So I'm not really normally a memoir person, but this year I've read, this month I've read two memoirs. I read this one and also David McAllister's Saw, which I also loved for different reasons. But this memoir is not just about, it's just about like so many different things. So David's very or Dave as he's really, kind of known to a lot of people, is really open and really forthcoming about the struggles he's had in his life with mental illness, which just doesn't get talked about enough. And it's also really, really dives deep into the culture of restaurants and what it means to be a chef. And it's got a great list at the back of things that you should do if you want to be a chef. And actually, after doing that, I was just like, I can't imagine anyone want to be a chef because it seems like a really, really hard life. But I know lots of people that are chefs and love it. So there's obviously, something great about it. And he does sort of try and articulate what's so great. And what I thought was amazing is that he talks about how he wasn't actually, when he started, like he wasn't very good at being like a chef. He was terrible. And he was just very lucky that people recognized that he just had this tenacity where he just went, if I just keep going at it, I will get better. And he did, and it worked. He does acknowledge, though, that a lot of that keep going was sort of that kind of mentality was actually because of his mental illness. So it was kind of like a way for him to sort of deal, it was part of it. It was all like bound up together. So you can't really separate his success from his personal struggles. And the other bit that I found really fascinating was when he did reflect back on the kind of time in the media where, there was one article where it was him and two other male chefs, and basically they were called gods of food. Like, when did people that made food become so elevated in the world that they're like the gods of food? And of course, the only ones in there were men. And he does talk about that whole, way of kitchens and of like commercial kitchens and like high-end kitchens and the kind of very masculine sort of way that they behave, and like how he was part of that, and how, for ages he was just like, yeah. And, you see all these like bro stories of like, going and doing all this like, macho cooking stuff and like, back to nature and, all this kind of stuff. And it was really interesting to read about how, he's recognizing that, that was not great, and that was not great for a lot of the people in the in the chef industry and all the people that kind of got left behind. He also had really interesting things to say about cultural appropriation in food, because he was Korean, but Momofuku was a noodle bar based on like ramen noodles, which was something that wasn't really being done in New York at the time that he opened the restaurant in 2000 and early 2000s. So yeah, it was just, and the writing was really great, and he's really good at expressing that, the writing wouldn't have been like, the book wouldn't have come together if it wasn't for his, his co-writer, and also Chris Ying, who he worked with on Lucky Peach magazine. And I just learned so much that I didn't know, and it was just structured really well. And it was really funny, and I definitely recommend it to anyone that has any interest in the restaurant industry or food, but also anyone that just wants to read a really good story about someone's personal struggles in life and how they've overcome it and what their views are on, the world.
That's really interesting, Shanu. I'm going to just like jump right in because it segues really nicely into an audiobook that I've been listening to. I've been listening to a book called Grit by Angela Duckworth, and it's a nonfiction book all about how talent is bollocks. Talent is like a teeny tiny part of the equation of high achievers, and how the majority of people who achieve really highly in life have this tenacity and this stick-to-itness to actually say, I'm not good at that yet. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep drilling. I'm going to keep practicing, which is really, it's the book I really needed to read at the moment. Like, you go through periods where you're like, I'm just not good at this or that or the other, and it's really refreshing to step back and look at how lots of very high achievers have started out being pretty good at something and have just worked at it to become leaders in their field. It's a really, really interesting book.
I mean, there's certainly some things that, like, as much as I work, I would never be a ballerina.
Absolutely. There are things that are like anatomically you can't do. but there's so much.
That's a small part. There's so much other stuff that you can do, and that too easily we just go, well, we're not good at it immediately, so we must give up on it.
Exactly.
And if you want to actually,
it reminds me of Outliers, the Malcolm Gladwell book. About the 10,000 hours, basically. To master
She talks
something.
about that. Yeah.
Which I think is the other thing that got lost in that, right? Is that people were like, that's a good message, but then people were just focusing on, like, I think that was an example of, like, you know, like on a physical prowess thing, as opposed to thinking of it as like a strategy thing for anything that you're doing in life.
Yeah. And she talks about as well, like, yes, 10,000 hours is good, but 10,000 hours of just doing a thing mindlessly is not necessarily going to get you to where you want to go. You need to be practicing deliberately the skill that you're trying to improve. You need to be focusing on the areas where you need improvement, rather than just doing the thing that you're already good at. You know, there's a lot of technique that needs to be taken into your practice. Just drilling something for 10,000 hours is not necessarily enough. And she talks about, you know, fixed mindset versus growth mindset. And she talks about this really interesting experimentation that was done, I think in the 70s. It sounds horribly, horribly cruel, where they gave electric shocks to dogs, and some of the dogs were able to stop the electric shock, and some of the dogs were not able to stop the electric shock by, like, pushing a button. And the dogs that were able to stop the electric shock were much more resilient to future pain than the dogs that didn't have any control over the electric shock, which shows that, you know, the sense of being in control of your own destiny makes you more resilient than having absolutely no hope and having no control.
Well, that's really interesting.
Really fascinating read.
I've heard about that book and wanted to read it before, but I've heard about it in relation to the sort of education movement around it, particularly in the US. I don't know if that's also come out here, because I don't have kids.
Yeah, it has.
Yeah.
I mean, my husband's a school teacher and has only started being a school teacher in the last few years. So he's done his Bachelor of Education reasonably recently. And that whole piece around fixed mindset versus growth mindset is very, very big in education, you know, learning education these days. You know, so rather than saying, oh, maybe maths is not your best subject, let's focus on English, making sure that your language towards children is, it sounds like you haven't mastered that particular technique yet. What can we do to work on it? What can we do to help you get better? And always looking at what you can and can't do now in terms of how you can improve it, and saying, well done, you worked really hard for that, rather than, well done, you're so talented.
Yeah, I reckon that's it. I think it's so important. It's in direct opposition to the sort of overwhelming parenting movement at the moment, which just seems to be about, like, praising your children to within an inch of their lives, and they're just and sort of allowing them to control your life as a parent.
Yeah.
It's never been something that I was very interested in, partially because I just, you know, I'm lazy and I don't want my kids to run my life. But I do think, you know, and I think kids don't seem very resilient these days, compared to the little kids when we were growing up, but certainly there's a type of kid around the age of about, you know, between 5 and 15 that I think we had more freedom or something, and I think having that freedom gives you more, like you were saying, control over your life, and maybe that does make you a bit more resilient and to try harder to do things that you wouldn't necessarily have done. Whereas I think kids these days, and I can totally see myself doing it with my kids, it's sort of more boxed into what they have to do. The next thing is the next thing they do, and there's not.
Well, we had so much less supervision, you know. So if you're having a fight with your mates, or, you know, something happened that was challenging, you just had to sort it out because there were no adults around a lot of the time.
Yeah,
These
it makes
days,
a big difference.
You know, you don't let your kids roam quite as far as young.
Yeah, kids these days.
Yeah. Get off my lawn.
The Grumpy Old Person Booktopia podcast.
I know, right?
John, what have you been reading?
I've been reading a couple of books, two that both have truth in the title. That's my linking. Also, that they are. I'm doing interviews with both of them for the podcast. One I've already done, which was with Fiona O'Loughlin, and her book is called "Truths from an Unreliable Witness." It's a memoir about and Fiona O'Loughlin, if you don't know, is a comedian. She was on, just very successful in the mid 2000s, I guess, early mid 2000s. Was at Edinburgh, was at Montreal, was at Melbourne Comedy Festivals, was on TV, was on Rove Live. Remember Rove?
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah, and I remember her being everywhere in a period of time when I was watching television at that time, and then I, just stopped paying attention, and she disappeared, and I didn't notice. But what was actually happening is that she was having like an addiction meltdown, and she addicted to alcohol and collapsed on stage. The public-facing part of that is that she collapsed on stage, blackout drunk, and then came out and said she's an alcoholic. But what you get in this book is the sort of behind-the-scenes exploration of how addiction has intertwined with her life. And I think it's just really dark in some ways, because I think what she's trying to do here is have a sort of honest accounting of what she really did, because a lot of it is bookended by all the lies she told to try and get out of being caught, because so much of it was tied up in the way she did comedy, and how, one of the things she says that she used to just drink 2 of those small bottles of Smirnoff before she went on stage every single time she went on stage, and she wasn't able to do it without that. And the process of getting to a point where she could do comedy without alcohol was long, and it involved so many falling off the wagon so many times, and and then to an extent that has never been made public. She was in a coma and nearly died. She's been in psych wards. She's been in rehab multiple times. She's nearly died a couple of times. It's just much darker than I think people realize. And yet the book is really funny. So, which sounds remarkable that that's the case, but she is just able to take quite dark material and turn it to humor, even in the darkest times. And her family seem to have inherited her sort of wit, so she can sort of report on the way that her family responds to her in this way that's very funny sometimes too. So I really enjoyed it. I think it's going to cut through. She's sort of on a good publicity jaunt at the moment, so I think it's going to probably be everywhere for a while. And it's definitely worth a read. I think she's really interesting, and I hope she pulls it together. She seems to have pulled it together for now, but reading the book, I think, and she would probably agree that it's always a process of holding on, because it's so easy to relapse. So I hope she does. It's very sad and interesting. The other book I'm reading that I've just started is Malcolm Knox's new non-fiction book. He's got a fiction book out at the moment that's everyone's talking about, it seems to be.
Including Hugh
Jackman. Yeah. But I'm reading his non-fiction book, which is called Truth is Trouble. It's about the sort of inciting incident of the book is the Israel Folau media furor around. I don't know if you remember that story, but Israel Folau is a rugby league player, I think. And don't quote me on that, because sports.
When you say rugby, that's the best way. Just say rugby, and then you don't have to worry about whether it's league or union.
People think rugby union.
Doesn't matter. That's on them, whatever they think. You've just said the word rugby. That's
rugby,
all you can do.
It's rugby. I just say football. He's a football player. That's actually
definitely
even more
not,
inclusive.
Definitely not soccer, though.
Not soccer. He is from a religious sect, I guess, that is quite hostile to homosexuality, and came out very, very aggressively against marriage equality at the time, and was censured by the football club eventually after some pressure, and I think was eventually sacked. And there was a huge media furor about it. But the way that Malcolm Knox talks about it is really interesting, because sort of puts it at this crux of the culture wars in Australia around free speech, but also the way that particular event changed the dividing lines between everyone, because there were people who were, religious conservatives who were obviously in favor of him, but then there were people who were in favor of, your workplace not censoring what you like, shouldn't have the power to censor what you say outside of workplaces, that were, reluctantly in favor of his right to keep his job. And then there's just so many aspects to it that I think are really interesting. So the book is, I've only read the first couple of chapters, but the book is going to explore that in each chapter in more detail, and how it is now interacting with the pandemic, basically, and how that's also changing the way that Australian culture wars are working. Because you've got these people who are like anti-mask and see it as an invasion of their civil liberties and freedom of speech, whilst also complaining about Black Lives Matter and protesters who go out to that. So it's just a really interesting time to write about politics.
I believe you're chatting with him on the podcast next week.
Yes, on I think Tuesday, which is the day of the US election. So it should be an interesting chat, I think.
Yeah, that will be fun. We'll see what the timing's like there. Did anybody have any other books they wanted to mention before we move on to our next segment?
I did want to just talk very briefly about how I really did love also, because I just mentioned in passing, David McAllister's Saw. If you have ever, it's like such a great behind the scenes of both the Australian Ballet, because he has worked with every single director of the Australian Ballet, because the Australian Ballet as it is has only been around since 1962, I think it's 1964, and he's basically spent his entire life since he was 18 with the Australian Ballet, and it's just amazing. And he danced and met every single famous ballerina or ballet dancer like that was around in the last 40 years. It's just incredible. Plus also his own personal story. It's so lovely. It's such a lovely story. And it also does, again, show you he had amazing talent, right? He was like born to dance. Like literally, if you want to talk about someone that's born to do something, he was born to dance. He just loved it from whenever he could remember. That's just what he wanted to do. But again, it shows that, yes, talent, but you have to also be so dedicated, and you have to be doing the ballet class every single day to really be where he is. And there's a great story he gets told of Maynard Gielgud, the artistic director of the Australian Ballet, telling him that, because he's has a quite a prominent nose, but basically telling him, yes, I think we might have to do something about that, and basically telling him that he'll probably have to get a nose job to stay in the Australian Ballet. But then comes back to him like weeks later after he's like freaking out about, oh my God, I'm never going to have a career, blah, 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 and saying, after seeing him dance, you'll be okay. Like, as in he can keep his nose.
You can keep your nose. So nice.
Yeah. And he was, we got to do, and if you haven't listened to the podcast, you can listen to Olivia and I like basically fangirling all over the podcast about his story. But, and we barely got to touch the surface about what's in the book, even though the book's not super long. It just covers like so many interesting areas of, like I said, his life, but also, what the Australian Ballet was like and is like, and how it's changing, and how it's, what he would like his legacy to be from that, which you can actually see. Like, if you're a person, you can actually see what, watch some Australian Ballet on online now. Obviously they can't perform in real life yet, and then watch what it was like 20 years ago, and you can really see the push to diversity and more body inclusivity, which you would never think would happen in ballet, but has. And I think the Australian Ballet has really led the way on that, and so I would definitely recommend that one as well. And that's it. 2 nonfiction. Who ever thought that I would be coming on?
All nonfiction, guguys. Thank
nonfiction.
you.
Well, I did actually finish a fiction book last night. I feel like I've read most of the really big, exciting fiction new releases that I wanted to read this year, and I went back and dipped into Past the Shallows by Fable Parrott. I read the one about Czechoslovakia when it came out. What's that one called? The new one. Anyway, yeah. And I went back and read Past the Shallows just this last week. It is just gorgeous. It's so evocative of, of time and place. It's so uniquely Australian and so uniquely Tasmanian. The way she depicts these children and their relationship to each other and their relationship to their family is just really touching. It's like similar to a Sophie Laguna in the way she really captures that spirit of childhood working through adversity. Just a gorgeous, gorgeous book. You can almost taste the sea salt in your mouth as you're reading it. You know, it's all about fishing in Tasmania. It's just gorgeous. I know that everybody's read that book, but if you haven't, I would urge you to go back and dip back in.
Yeah, I read that when it first came out many years ago, and it's funny that you say you can like taste the sea salt. My experience with it was like I could feel like the cold and the damp. Like,
yes,
yeah, so evocative.
Yeah, that's right. You're almost shivering under the covers reading it in bed.
Yeah.
So I finished that and I went from sort of the sublime to the ridiculous. I've now picked up A Single Man by Christopher Isherwood. And I'm a couple of chapters into that. And that is very evocative and lovely in a completely different way.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your picks, guys. Before we move on to our favorite part of the show,
when you say your favorite part of the show, I think you mean, yeah. We get to embarrass all of us and humiliate all of us, which is, I guess, a change from what we usually do to you. So fair enough.
Yeah,
the tables will turn.
So we're sponsored by another book, which is The Reckless Oath We Made by Bryn Greenwood. Z is nobody's fairy tale princess. Almost 6 foot with a redhead's temper and a shattered hip, she has a long list of worries, never-ending bills, her beautiful gullible sister, her 5-year-old nephew, her housebound mother, and her drug-dealing boss. Z may not be a princess, but Gentry is an actual knight, complete with sword, armor, and code of honor. 2 years ago, the voices he hears called him to be Z's champion. Both shy and autistic, he's barely spoken to her since, but he has kept watch, ready to come to her aid. When an abduction tears Z's family apart, she turns to the last person she ever imagined, and Gentry sets in motion a chain of events that will not only change both of their lives, but bind them to one another forever. The Reckless Oath We Made by Bryn Greenwood is available from the 17th of November through booktopia.com.au. All right. Are we ready? So, as usual, what sounds will we be making to buzz in? Jo, what are you going to buzz in with? That's You want to go with
Yeah.
Really?
I want to go with
Shanu?
Come back to me. That's not what I'm saying. I just don't know.
All right, Joel.
I'm trying to think of something appropriate.
I'm going to go with...
Okay. All right,
I'm going to say a word. It's going to be pumpkin. I'm going to go with you. I'm rolling with the Halloween theme.
Okay. All right, it's time for book fight. Question 1. Name the author of the 2012 literary zombie novel Zone 1? This is a super famous author, guys.
Oh, pumpkin. I'm just going to say Stephen King because it's the only person I can think of that's a famous author. What did you say? What was the book called? I wasn't even listening, honestly.
Zone 1.
I know this one. This is by the guy who did the Underground Railroad, right?
Yes.
I know.
Colson Whitehead.
Yeah.
Oh, this is did you say literary? Oh, I thought
literary.
Sorry, I thought we were talking. This is a Halloween one, so I wasn't actually listening, and I just assumed that it was
That's
like.
why, see, I'm trying to democratize it and make it less like genre and niche and more like open to you guys.
So why has that got anything to do with Halloween?
Because
it's zombies.
It's a zombie. It's like monsters. Zombies.
I think we all know that Halloween's about dressing up as sexy nurses. I don't know what the zombies come from.
We feature lots of books about sexy nurses on booktopia.com.au, I can tell you.
I'm sure we do.
Sexy nurse werewolves.
I have questions about sexy nurse werewolf. So,
no.
Apologies. Okay, next question. You can pick up a number of points here. Name all of the Hannibal Lecter novels by Thomas Harris.
Silence of the Lambs.
Yep.
That's the only one I know. There's that new one though. The newer one, was that about him as well? No, I can't remember what it was called anyway.
Anybody else?
There's Red Dragon.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's the one you're thinking of.
Hannibal Rising. That's newish.
Yeah.
No, that's relatively. And the Silence of the Lambs. What's the other one?
There's one.
Is there one actually called Hannibal?
Hannibal.
Yes.
Oh yeah. I think Shanu should get that point.
Yep, absolutely.
I don't mind. I'm never going to win.
They're the only ones I know.
All right, yeah. So yeah, Red Dragon, Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal, and Hannibal Rising, which was the more recent one, which was a prequel. All right.
Oh, that would make sense.
Next question. The 1971 Charlton Heston movie, The Omega Man, is based on which classic apocalyptic horror novel that was first published in 1954?
That wasn't my noise.
No.
Yeah, no one should ever make sighing the noise because then you would.
I'll give you another clue. It was filmed again under its original title this century, and it starred Will Smith.
Oh, I know this.
Joel.
I Am Legend.
I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. Very good.
I read that book. That's a good book.
Yeah.
Did you watch the movie? Was the movie any good?
The movie was not good.
Yeah. I mean, I like Will Smith.
I've never seen The Omega Man, though.
Other than that, no.
All right, next question. Jonathan Harker is a central character in which 1897 horror novel, which is probably the most influential novel of its particular horror subgenre?
Dracula?
Dracula, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's what I thought. That's good. At least I thought the right thing.
Sorry.
Okay, name the 2007 novel that is a fictionalized account of an ill-fated 1845 Arctic expedition with additional horror elements that was the basis for a recent TV series on a popular streaming service. Bonus points if you can name the author.
That question's too long.
Say the beginning part again.
2007 novel. It's a fictionalized account of an 1845 Arctic expedition where the author has added fictionalized horror elements, and a popular streaming service that I will not name made it into a TV series recently.
Oh, I can't think of any TV series about an Arctic expedition.
I do know what you're talking about, but this is so of not interest to me that I immediately, when it came up on said streaming service, went straight past it. And
can you give us another clue, Mark?
It stars Jared Harris, who was the guy in Chernobyl, and something else recently.
Yeah, I even read about it. Still don't remember it because not interested.
Don't have it in my brain.
Okay, it was The Terror by Dan Simmons.
I know that I've heard of that, but
and it's a good show. Okay, next one. Joel's really going to get this one. Who am I? I was born.
Mark.
Yeah.
Didn't make the noise, Joe. Didn't get the point.
Yeah. Also, I'm not going to give you a point because, like, I don't even know who I am these days. I was born in Rhode Island in 1890. I was a prolific writer of letters, and I also wrote and published stories that were mainly published in pulp magazines before dying in poverty at the age of 46. However, I am now regarded as one of the most significant horror writers of all time. My work views humanity as an insignificant part of a cruel and uncaring universe and is often referred to as cosmic horror. Joel.
H.P. Lovecraft.
H.P. Lovecraft.
So I was right. There was a question about him in the book fight.
I was waiting to see.
I couldn't be bothered, honestly. I'm not going to win, so what's the point?
Well, we have one question left, and the score so far: Joe is on 1, Shanu is on 1, and Joel is on 6. So
see what I mean? Why bother?
All right.
I like this book fight. I'm okay with it, guys.
Honestly, I'm fine. I'm very happy for anyone to. I don't care about winning, so I'm very happy that if Joel does, that you win. Doesn't that make the winning less important if no one else cares about it?
You're really ruining my win.
I know.
I want you to be
well done, Shanu. 5 points.
Yeah.
The last question. This is the opening line of a novel. It is a horror novel, but it's a very iconic kind of moment. So let's see if you guys can guess it. Okay, so which novel opens with the line, The terror, which would not end for another 28 years, began, so far as I know or can tell, with a boat made from a sheet of newspaper floating down a gutter swollen with rain.
Oh, I know it, but should I? Is it it?
It is it. By Stephen King. Little boy chasing a newspaper boat in the gutter, and then...
I don't actually know the first line of it.
Now you do.
Now I do.
Yeah. Okay, so Joel...
That was a very Mark-focused book fight. After all your protestations to the...
I tried to make it.
I'm okay with it because I got it.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Joel got 7, winning. Jo and Shanu 1 each.
No, but I gave Shanu 5 points for her ribbing of Joel.
Okay, she's still
lost. So, which is fine.
Well, thank you guys for being such good sports. Thank you for joining me today. Weekend Booktopian is produced by Nick Wasiliev. You can find links to the books we discussed today in the episode description, or you can find them on booktopia.com.au. You can listen to all of our shows for free on SoundCloud and iTunes, including our recent interview with Joanne Harris and our Booktopia on Halloween book discussion. Until next time, thank you for listening and never stop reading.
Thank you for listening to the Booktopia podcast channel. Don't forget, you can subscribe to us on SoundCloud and iTunes for free and get access to hundreds of author discussions, book analysis pieces, and more. Or, if your eyes need a workout, head to Booktopia TV on YouTube. Don't forget, for all books featured in this podcast and for access to a whole bunch of other fun content on our blog, head to Booktopia, Australia's local bookstore, at booktopia.com.au.